There's something hauntingly familiar about the way so many ancient stories begin, with a world-ending disaster, a flood that wipes the earth clean, a fire that scorches the sky. A battle between gods that tears the heavens apart. These aren't just isolated tales, they're echoes, repeating across cultures separated by oceans and centuries. The Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh speaks of a great deluge. The Mayans warned of cycles of destruction and rebirth. Even the Norse myths describe Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. Why is it that nearly every civilization, no matter how distant or disconnected, seems to carry this same memory of a cataclysm? Could these stories be fragments of something real, a shared trauma buried deep in humanity's collective past? Or do they reveal something even more profound about how we understand our place in the universe? Think about the last time you heard a story that sent chills down your spine, the kind that feels too vivid to be mere fiction. That's the power these ancient cataclysms hold. They're not just myths, they're warnings, lessons, and sometimes even prophecies. The sinking of Atlantis, the biblical flood, the Hindu tale of Pralaya, each one paints a picture of a world reset, a slate wiped clean. But here's the fascinating part. Many of these stories share uncanny details. Survivors building boats, animals saved in pairs, divine anger and human folly. These parallels are too striking to dismiss as coincidence. So what if these legends aren't just imaginative fables? What if they're distant memories of real events, global catastrophes that shaped the course of history? That's the mystery we're diving into today. We'll trace these cataclysmic tales back to their roots, exploring the science, the symbolism, and the startling connections between them. Could ancient civilizations have witnessed something we've forgotten? Are these stories coded messages from our ancestors, urging us to pay attention? Or do they reflect something deeper, a universal truth about the rise and fall of civilizations? By the end of this journey, you'll see these age-old legends in a whole new light. So let's unravel the secrets hidden in these ancient warnings, piece by piece, and discover what they might still have to teach us today. The past is whispering. Are you ready to listen? What if these cataclysmic myths are more than just stories? What if they're humanity's first attempts at science, primitive explanations for events too vast to comprehend? Take the Babylonian flood myth in Gilgamesh, where the gods send a deluge to wipe out humanity. Now compare it to the biblical story of Noah, or the Aztec legend of the fourth son destroyed by water. The similarities aren't just thematic, they're structural. A divine warning, a chosen survivor, a vessel carrying the seeds of rebirth. These aren't random details, they're the building blocks of cultural memory. Now consider the geological record. Around 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas period saw sudden climate shifts, rising sea levels, and possible comet impacts, events catastrophic enough to reshape civilizations. Could this be the real disaster behind so many flood myths? Indigenous Australian stories speak of coastal lands swallowed by waves. The Hopi describe underground cities built to escape fiery destruction. Even Plato's account of Atlantis sinking matches the timeline of massive Mediterranean floods. The pieces fit together almost too perfectly, but here's where it gets even more fascinating. These stories don't just record disasters, they encode survival wisdom. The Norse taught that after Ragnarök, two humans would repopulate the world from Yggdrasil's roots. The Maori speak of Tain separating earth and sky to create space for life. These aren't just tales of endings, they're blueprints for resilience. Ancient cultures distilled their hardest-won lessons into these narratives, passing down knowledge through generations in the form of gripping drama. So why does this matter today? Because these myths reveal something fundamental about human psychology. When faced with the unimaginable, we don't just panic, we storytell. We reshape chaos into narrative, finding patterns where there seems to be none. Whether it's volcanic eruptions preserved in Aboriginal Dreamtime or the sinking of Dwarka in Hindu texts, these stories are more than folklore. They're the first draft of history written in the language of metaphor, and if we learn to read them properly, they might just help us prepare for the next great upheaval whenever it comes. Of all the ways the world could end, why do floods dominate ancient myths? Water appears again and again, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, as the great cleanser, the force that wipes away civilizations so new ones can rise. The Sumerian Eridu Genesis describes the gods unleashing a flood to silence humanity's noise. The Hindu Puranas speak of Matsya, the fish avatar who saves mankind from the cosmic deluge. Even in China, the legend of Gan and Yu tells of a 9-year flood so vast it reshaped the land. What makes water the universal symbol of catastrophe? Perhaps because it's both familiar and terrifying, a substance essential for life that can also erase entire cities in an instant. Now consider the science behind these stories. 7,000 years ago, melting glaciers caused the Mediterranean to burst into the Black Sea, flooding an area the size of Ireland in months. Similar events unfolded as Ice Age lakes drained catastrophically across North America. The geological record shows tsunami deposits in coastal regions from Norway to Chile. These weren't local disasters, they were continental-scale events witnessed by thousands. Could the flood myths be fractured memories of these real upheavals? The details align suspiciously well. The Aboriginal story of Gurangach describes rainbow serpents carving valleys during great floods, eerily matching geological evidence of ancient flash floods in Australia's Blue Mountains. But here's the twist: flood myths aren't just about destruction, they're about second chances. In the Babylonian Atrahasis epic, the gods regret the flood immediately, starving without human sacrifices. The Maori tale of Tohaki has the hero surviving the deluge to repopulate the earth. These stories carry a dual message. Yes, the gods may punish, but humanity always endures. That's why flood narratives so often include arks, canoes, or floating cities. They're not just survival manuals, they're metaphors for cultural resilience. When the Dogon people of Mali describe ancestral spirits escaping floods in woven baskets, they're encoding a truth: civilizations don't die, they adapt. So why does this pattern matter today? Because these ancient stories reveal how societies process trauma. Modern climate change narratives echo the same themes: rising waters, displaced populations, warnings ignored until it's too late. The difference is that our ancestors turned their catastrophes into lessons, wrapping them in symbols that lasted millennia. Maybe that's the real purpose of flood myths, not to frighten us, but to remind us that after every deluge there's dry land ahead, if we're wise enough to build the right boat. Fire myths burn just as brightly across cultures as flood legends, but with a different kind of terror. One that lingers in the smell of ash and the glow of embers. Take the Hindu prophecy of Kalki, the final avatar of Vishnu, who rides a white horse to purge the world in flames before its rebirth. Or the Zoroastrian Frashokrati, where a river of molten metal cleanses the wicked while the righteous walk unharmed. Even Norse mythology's Ragnarök ends with Surtur's fire consuming the earth, only for life to sprout anew from the scorched soil. Why does fire dominate so many apocalyptic visions? Because unlike water, which can recede, fire leaves nothing untouched. It's the ultimate irreversible transformation, a force that doesn't just erase, but fundamentally alters what it destroys. Now look beyond the myths to the Earth itself. The volcanic eruption of Thera around 1600 BC didn't just bury Akrotiri. It may have inspired Plato's Atlantis story and the biblical plagues of Egypt. Indigenous tales from the Pacific Northwest speak of mountains that breathed fire long before modern geology confirmed their volcanic past. In Java, the legend of Batara Kala describes a sky god so angry he hurled flaming rocks at the earth, mirroring the region's history of meteor impact. These aren't just imaginative stories, they're likely eyewitness accounts dressed in divine language. When the Aztecs predicted the fifth sun would end in earthquakes and fiery hail, were they recalling real eruptions from their ancestral homelands? Yet fire myths carry a paradox. While floods often symbolize punishment, fiery apocalypses frequently promise renewal. The phoenix isn't just a bird that burns, it's one that rises from its own ashes. The Zoroastrian Saoshyant, or world renewer, emerges from flames to restore cosmic order. Even modern dystopian fiction follows this pattern, from the nuclear winters of Cold War lore to the climate crisis allegories in today's films. Fire doesn't just destroy, it purifies, distilling societies down to their essentials. Perhaps that's why these stories resonate so deeply today. When we imagine wildfires swallowing cities or supervolcanoes darkening skies, we're not just fearing disaster. We're grappling with the same question our ancestors did. What remains when everything else burns away? The answer might lie in an unexpected place: science. Researchers have found charcoal layers in ice cores and sediment records, evidence of continent-spanning wildfires triggered by comet impacts 12,000 years ago. Aboriginal Australian stories describe a time when the sky fell, bringing fire that forced people into caves, a detail that matches geological evidence of a cosmic airburst. These aren't just coincidences, they're cultural memories preserved across millennia. The Hopi prophecy of a blue star appearing before purification by fire takes on new meaning when you learn certain supernova could irradiate Earth with deadly gamma rays. Our ancestors may have been recording celestial events we're only now beginning to understand. So what do these fiery legends teach us? That destruction and creation are two sides of the same coin. A forest fire clears dead wood so new seeds can sprout. A supernova's death scatters the elements that form planets. Societies collapse, yes, but from their ashes come innovations, migrations, revolutions in thought. The next time you hear a myth about the world ending in flames, listen closely. It might not be predicting doom, but whispering a secret about resilience. After all, every apocalypse story has one thing in common. Someone always survives to tell the tale. The clash between gods and chaos isn't just spectacle, it's the heartbeat of ancient cosmology. Picture the Egyptian god Ra sailing his solar bark through the underworld each night, fending off Apep, the serpent of chaos who threatens to swallow the sun. This wasn't merely a story, it was an explanation for why the sun rose again each morning. If Ra triumphed, order prevailed. If Apep won, eternal darkness would reign. The same tension pulses through the Greek Titanomachy, where Zeus and the Olympians overthrow the primal titans in a war so violent it shook the pillars of the earth. And in Mesopotamia, the Enuma Elish describes Marduk slaying the dragon Tiamat, splitting her body to form the heavens and the earth. These aren't random battles, they're foundational myths, blueprints for how ancient cultures understood the fragile balance between creation and destruction. But why frame natural disasters as divine conflicts? Imagine living in a world without science, where earthquakes shattered cities and storms blotted out the sun. The idea that unseen gods were wrestling with cosmic forces made the chaos feel intentional, even purposeful. The Babylonian creation myth doesn't just describe Tiamat's defeat, It mirrors the seasonal floods of the Tigris and Euphrates, where violent waters recede to reveal fertile land. The gods' victories become metaphors for nature's cycles, a way to find meaning in catastrophe. And it wasn't just about nature. When the Hittites told of the storm god Teshub battling the sea monster Alikami, they might have been encoding memories of volcanic eruptions or invasions, real historical upheavals recast as mythological drama. What's startling is how these stories transcend geography. The Norse spoke of Thor fighting the world serpent Jörmungandr during Ragnarök, while Hindu texts describe Indra slaying the drought-causing demon Vritra. Though separated by continents, these myths share a core truth. Chaos must be defeated but never fully eradicated. The serpent always lurks beneath the world tree. The storm god's enemy will rise again. This cyclical view of conflict reveals something profound. Our ancestors didn't just fear chaos, they expected it. They saw it as necessary, a force that kept the cosmos dynamic. Modern science gives us different explanations for disasters, but the psychological pattern remains. When pandemics spread or climates shift, we still personify the threat, labeling viruses as invasive or calling hurricanes monstrous. The old myths live on in our language because they speak to a deeper truth. Humans need narratives to endure the unimaginable. Whether it's a volcano or a revolution, framing chaos as a battle makes it feel conquerable. So the next time you hear a myth about gods clashing in the heavens, listen for the real-world echoes. That thunder isn't just Zeus's anger, it's the sound of humanity trying to make sense of a universe that refuses to stay still. Lost lands like Atlantis and Lemuria haunt our collective imagination not because they feel fictional, but because they feel possible. Every culture has its version of these sunken paradises, from the Celtic kingdom of Wise swallowed by the sea to the Japanese legend of Mu, a Pacific utopia lost beneath the waves. What's fascinating isn't just the repetition of these stories, but the eerie details they share. Advanced civilizations, divine punishment, a single catastrophic night where the earth opens or the seas rise. Plato's Atlantis, described around 360 BC, ticks all these boxes. A naval power with miraculous technology, destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. But here's the twist. While scholars debate whether Atlantis was pure allegory, real-world parallels suggest these myths might be tangled memories of actual disasters. Take the Minoans of Crete, whose thriving culture collapsed around 1600 BC, right when the volcanic island of Thera exploded with the force of 40 atomic bombs. Tsunamis would have ravaged coastal cities like Knossos, leaving ruins that match Plato's description of Atlantis's concentric rings. Even the timing fits. Egyptian priests told Solon of a catastrophe 9,000 years before his time, a number that could reflect a mistranslation of lunar cycles or Egyptian hieratic numerals. Meanwhile, in India, the ancient city of Dwarka sits submerged off Gujarat's coast, its underwater structures aligning with Hindu texts that speak of Krishna's golden city consumed by the sea. Coincidence maybe, but when you piece together geological records and oral histories, a pattern emerges. Civilizations really do vanish beneath the waves. The question isn't just whether these places existed, it's why we keep resurrecting them in stories. Psychologists suggest lost continents tap into a deep-seated nostalgia for a golden age, a time before corruption or decay. The Aztecs spoke of Aztlan, an idyllic homeland abandoned for a harder world. The Greeks yearned for the sunken Hyperborea, where people lived in perpetual peace. These aren't just escapist fantasies, they're cultural mirrors. When Plato warns that Atlantis fell due to arrogance and greed, he's not describing a distant catastrophe, he's holding up a reflection to Athens itself. Modern discoveries add fuel to the mystery. Underwater megaliths near Yonaguni, Japan, resemble stepped pyramids, while the Baltic Sea's Stonehenge formation hints at drowned rituals. Even if these aren't literal remnants of Mu or Lemuria, they prove one thing: the ocean hides more history than we've ever recorded. Rising sea levels since the last ice age swallowed vast stretches of coastline, entire societies lost without a trace. The Aboriginal stories of Dreamtime floods preserving sacred landscapes suddenly feel less like myth and more like oral maps to forgotten worlds. So why does it matter? Because these legends aren't just about the past, they're about the future. Every Atlantis story carries the same warning: civilizations rise, but they can also fall. When we imagine advanced cultures crumbling, we're rehearsing our own vulnerabilities. Climate change, rising seas, ecological collapse, the threats are different, but the lesson remains. The next lost continent might not be a mythical utopia, it might be ours. The notion that time itself moves in great, spiraling loops, not a straight line but a wheel that turns endlessly, runs like a golden thread through the oldest human stories. The Hindus envisioned 4 yugas, each darker than the last, culminating in the Kali Yuga's moral decay before the cycle resets. The Maya carved intricate calendars tracking vast cosmic cycles, each ending in transformation, not termination. Even the Aztecs spoke of 5 successive suns, each world destroyed by flood, jaguars, wind, fire, only to be reborn anew. These weren't just poetic metaphors, they were sophisticated observations of nature's rhythms encoded into myth. Seasons turn, rivers flood and recede, stars rise and set in predictable arcs. If the natural world operates in cycles, why wouldn't human history? Modern science offers startling support for this ancient intuition. Geologists trace mass extinctions occurring roughly every 26 million years, possibly tied to our solar system's movement through the Milky Way. Ice cores reveal climatic swings between glaciation and warming every 100,000 years. Even archaeology confirms the rise and fall of civilizations in waves: the Bronze Age collapse, the repeated abandonment of cities like Cahokia or Anka. The Maya, who tracked planetary alignments with razor precision, might have noticed these patterns firsthand. Their long count calendar didn't end in 2012, it rolled over, like an odometer reaching 0 before starting anew. Yet there's a profound difference between how ancient and modern minds interpret these cycles. Where we see random disasters, they saw purposeful renewal. The Aztec 5th sun wasn't doomed to perish, it was destined to evolve, with humanity's fate hinging on rituals that kept the cosmic engine turning. Norse mythology's Ragnarök ends with 2 survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, emerging to repopulate a greener world. These stories carry an implicit optimism. Destruction isn't final. It's a necessary clearing, like forest fires that release seeds dormant in the soil. Compare this to today's apocalyptic anxieties, where climate change or pandemics are framed as endpoints rather than transitions. Our ancestors might ask, why fear the turning of the wheel when you know spring always follows winter? Perhaps the most radical idea hidden in these cyclical myths is the challenge they pose to modernity's cult of progress. We assume technology and societies advance linearly, always improving, but the archaeological record tells a different story. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek astronomical computer, rivals the complexity of 18th century clocks. Roman concrete self-heals, a technology we've only recently rediscovered. The cyclical view acknowledges that knowledge can be lost as easily as gained, that dark ages follow golden ones. When the Hopi speak of previous worlds destroyed by human folly, they're not describing fantasy. They're warning that civilizations carry the seeds of their own collapse. So what can we learn from these ancient timekeepers? That resilience lies in expecting change, not resisting it. The Jain tradition teaches that every soul will live through countless eras, each offering new lessons. The Maori creation story has the god Tain separating earth and sky over and over, as if practice makes perfect. These narratives don't just explain the past, they prepare us for the future. In a world facing climate shifts and societal upheaval, maybe the wisest thing we can do is listen to those who have already imagined the end and the beginning more times than we've bothered to count. Astronomical cataclysms loom large in humanity's oldest stories, not as abstract fears but as witnessed events seared into collective memory. Take the Greek myth of Phaethon, the reckless son of Helios who lost control of the sun chariot, scorching the earth until Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt. For centuries, this was dismissed as pure fantasy until modern researchers noticed chilling parallels to cosmic airbursts. When a comet fragment explodes in the atmosphere, it creates a fireball hotter than the sun's surface, followed by shock waves that flatten forests and ignite continents. The Aboriginal story of the fire devil Wallenbaum matches this exactly, describing a sky being whose tail brought flames that forced people into caves. These aren't just metaphors, they're trauma responses, eyewitness accounts dressed in mythological language. Then there's the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which suggests a cluster of comet fragments struck Earth around 12,900 years ago, triggering wildfires so vast they blacken the sky and plunge the planet into a mini ice age. Geologists have found nanodiamonds and melted glass across 4 continents, evidence of temperatures hotter than volcanic eruptions. Now reread the Norse description of Fimbulwinter, 3 years of endless snow before Ragnarök. Or the Egyptian tale of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess sent to destroy humanity, her rage so fierce it turned the Nile red, a possible reference to iron-rich impact debris staining rivers. The connections are too precise to ignore. Pole shift theories add another layer. Ancient texts like the Hindu Vedas speak of the sun rising in the west, while Babylonian astronomers recorded stars changing their paths. Mainstream science confirms Earth's magnetic poles wander and occasionally flip entirely over millennia, but some myths suggest faster, catastrophic shifts. The Hopi prophecy of the 9th sign warns the world will spin like a wild top, aligning with fringe theories about crustal displacement. Even Plato's Timaeus mentions civilizations destroyed when the course of the stars reversed. Whether these describe true polar wander or simply the disorientation caused by meteor-induced auroras, one thing's clear: our ancestors were tracking celestial changes we're only now beginning to measure. What's most striking is how these stories converge. The Chinese legend of Gong Gong, a water god who crashed into the world pillar, tilting the sky and flooding the earth, mirrors both impact events and pole shift folklore. The Bible's Joshua stopping the sun could reflect atmospheric anomalies from a comet's debris field. These myths aren't random, they're interlocking pieces of a prehistoric puzzle. When multiple cultures separated by oceans describe the same phenomena, fire from the sky, days of darkness, wandering stars, it's worth asking what they actually saw. Modern astronomy gives us tools to decode these warnings. The 1908 Tunguska event proved a small cosmic body could flatten 800 square miles without leaving a crater. The Carrington event of 1859 showed how solar storms could fry telegraph lines. Imagine that happening during the Bronze Age, recorded as the gods hurling lightning. Our ancestors may not have understood orbital mechanics, but they knew enough to watch the skies and remember. Those myths aren't just campfire tales, they're humanity's first scientific records, written in the only language they had, story. And if we're wise enough to listen, they might just help us prepare for the next cosmic surprise. Imagine a story so powerful it survives centuries without a single written word. That's the magic and the mystery of oral tradition. Before ink touched parchment, before hieroglyphs lined temple walls, humanity's history lived in the voices of elders, the songs of shamans, the campfire tales told under starlit skies. The Australian Aboriginal concept of dreamtime isn't just myth. It's a living library where knowledge of land, law, and cataclysms like the Great Flood of Gunnabibai have been passed down for over 60,000 years. Native American tribes like the Choctaw speak of a moon that cracked open, raining fire, a tale that mirrors geological evidence of ancient meteor strikes in the Ohio River Valley. And in West Africa, the Dogon people preserve astonishingly accurate astronomical knowledge of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye within their oral traditions. These aren't just stories, they're time capsules, preserving real events in the amber of collective memory. But here's the catch: every retelling bends the truth slightly. Like a game of cosmic telephone, details shift with each generation. A tsunami becomes a divine serpent's wrath. A volcanic eruption transforms into a god's fiery breath. The Klamath people's legend of Mount Mazama's explosion 7,000 years ago, now Oregon's Crater Lake, describes a battle between sky and mountain spirits. The eruption did happen, but the why and how became mythologized. This blurring between fact and symbolism isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Oral traditions prioritize meaning over precision. When the Haida of the Pacific Northwest recount how ravens stole the sun to end an eternal darkness, they're not just explaining daybreak, they're encoding survival lessons about perseverance during long winters. The real puzzle lies in separating geological fact from mythological embroidery. Take the global flood myths. Scientists now know that as glaciers melted 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose 400 feet, drowning coastlines worldwide. Aboriginal stories describe ancestors retreating inland as the ocean claimed the land, matching archaeological finds of submerged settlements off Australia's coast. Similarly, the Yurok tribe's tale of a great quake splitting the earth aligns perfectly with California's seismic history. These parallels suggest oral traditions aren't pure fiction. They're fractured reflections of real catastrophes, refracted through the prism of time. What's extraordinary is how these stories preserve practical wisdom. The Andaman Islanders' legend of the Firefly Star that brought a devastating storm likely refers to the 1883 Krakatoa eruption, which tinted skies worldwide. Their tale includes instructions to tie down roofs, a survival tactic for future eruptions. The Maori story of Tohaki climbing the sky to restore sunlight after a long winter encodes navigation techniques for Polynesian voyagers. By wrapping vital knowledge in vivid narrative, oral cultures ensured their descendants would remember not just the event, but how to survive its repetition. This raises a profound question. If oral traditions can preserve truths across millennia, what else might they be hiding in plain sight? The Cherokee story of the Moon-Eyed People driven underground matches archaeological evidence of pre-Columbian European contact. The Sanskrit Rigveda's description of the Saraswati River, once dismissed as myth, was later confirmed by satellite imagery revealing its ancient course. Perhaps these stories aren't distortions at all, but a different kind of historical record, one where emotional truth matters as much as factual accuracy. After all, when your ancestors survive a flood that drowns the world, the lesson isn't just how high the water rose, it's that humanity endured, and that's a story worth telling, no matter how the details change. The ruins of Pompeii tell a story so vivid, it's as if time stopped mid-sentence. Walk those ash-covered streets today, and you'll see loaves of bread fossilized in ovens, frescoes frozen in their final colors, even the hollow spaces where bodies once lay. now filled with plaster to preserve their last moments. This isn't just archaeology, it's a snapshot of catastrophe, a real-life disaster that mirrors the legend of Atlantis in its suddenness, but Pompeii is only the most famous example. Dig deeper and you'll find sites like Akrotiri on Santorini, a Minoan town buried under volcanic pumice around 1600 BCE. Its multi-story buildings, intricate drainage systems, and vibrant murals were preserved like a time capsule, much like Plato's description of Atlantis's advanced society. The parallels are uncanny right down to the bull imagery found in both Minoan art and Atlantean lore. Then there's Dwarka, the golden city of Hindu legend, said to have been built by Krishna himself before vanishing beneath the waves. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as pure myth until marine archaeologists discovered submerged structures off India's Gujarat coast. Stone anchors, pottery, and even a fortified wall now lie under 60 feet of water, dating back to the same era the Mahabharata describes Dwarka's sinking. Geological studies confirm this coastline was above water 3,500 years ago, meaning the city's submergence wasn't just poetic license. It was a real event, etched into cultural memory and passed down through generations. But not all disaster myths leave such clear fingerprints. Take the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, when thriving civilizations from Greece to Egypt crumbled almost overnight. Clay tablets from Ugarit speak of enemy ships appearing without warning, while Egyptian inscriptions beg for grain to stave off famine. The archaeological record shows burned palaces, abandoned cities, and a dramatic drop in literacy. Yet despite these physical clues, the cause remains debated. Was it climate change, earthquakes, invaders, or some perfect storm of all three? What's fascinating is how each culture processed the trauma. The Greeks later wove it into their Dark Age myths, like the fall of Troy or the wanderings of Odysseus. Even the Bible's Exodus narrative, with its plagues and fleeing refugees, might reflect garbled memories of this chaotic period. Now cross the Atlantic to Cahokia, the great mound city near modern St. Louis. At its peak around 1100 CE, it was larger than medieval London, home to 20,000 people. Then, suddenly, it was abandoned. Soil samples reveal a decades-long drought, while skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition and violence. But the Osage oral tradition adds another layer. They speak of a chief who arrogantly built a tower to the heavens, angering the gods who then scattered the people. Sound familiar? It's a Native American echo of the Tower of Babel, a story that may have sprung from the same human instinct to explain societal collapse through moral failure. The real revelation here isn't just that some myths have roots in fact, it's how selectively cultures remember. The same disaster can spawn a dozen different legends, each reflecting the values and fears of the people who survived it. A volcanic eruption becomes a god's wrath in one culture and a cosmic battle in another. A drowned city might symbolize divine punishment or simply the cruel whims of nature. That's the power of archaeology. It doesn't just confirm or deny myths, it shows us how humanity transforms raw trauma into stories that endure. When we sift through the rubble of these ancient sites, we're not just uncovering lost history. We're reading the first draft of human resilience written in stone, bone, and the occasional preserved loaf of bread. Cataclysms aren't just about floods and fire. They're mirrors held up to the human psyche, reflecting our deepest fears and highest hopes. Consider the phoenix, that mythical bird that burns to ashes only to emerge reborn. It's not just a pretty symbol, it's a psychological lifeline, a way to conceptualize surviving the unthinkable. Carl Jung saw these recurring myths as archetypes, universal patterns bubbling up from the collective unconscious. When cultures across time dream up stories of destruction and renewal, they're not just describing disasters. They're grappling with the terrifying truth that everything ends, and the exhilarating possibility that endings aren't final. Take Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse where gods and monsters battle to mutual annihilation. On the surface, it's a grim tale, but look closer. After the bloodshed, 2 humans survive hidden in the world tree's roots, and a new green earth rises from the sea. This isn't nihilism, it's radical acceptance. The Vikings didn't sugarcoat life's brutality, but they also refused to believe devastation was the last word. Modern psychology calls this post-traumatic growth, the idea that people often emerge stronger after crises. Our ancestors were mapping this terrain centuries ago, using myths as survival guides for the soul. Now shift from the personal to the societal. The Hindu concept of Kali Yuga, the current age of discord, echoes contemporary fears of polarization and decay. But here's the twist. Hindu cosmology promises this darkness is just one phase in an endless cycle. Similarly, the Aztecs performed ritual sacrifices not out of bloodlust, but to feed the sun and postpone the 5th sun's fiery end. These aren't primitive superstitions, they're sophisticated coping mechanisms. When chaos threatens, rituals and stories restore a sense of control. Today's climate activists warning of ecological collapse or tech prophets predicting AI doomsday are playing the same archetypal role, translating existential dread into narratives that mobilize action. What's most revealing is how these myths expose humanity's dual relationship with catastrophe. On one hand, we dread it. The Babylonian-era epic describes gods unleashing plague and war until humanity's screams become like a whirlwind. That's raw trauma preserved in verse, yet simultaneously we're drawn to these stories, binge-watching dystopian shows, devouring disaster films. Why? Because they let us rehearse survival. Every zombie apocalypse story is secretly a drill for societal collapse. Every tale of drowned cities whispers, "This happened before." We remember, perhaps that's the ultimate lesson hidden in these ancient warnings. They don't just predict doom, they train us to face it. When the Maori speak of the demigod Moi fishing up islands from the sea, they're not just explaining geography. They're encoding a mindset: the world is malleable. Disaster isn't fate, it's raw material. From the ashes of every cataclysmic myth rises the same stubborn message: endings are just beginnings in disguise. And that might be the most resilient idea our species has ever dreamed up. The moment you start lining up these cataclysmic myths side by side, something extraordinary emerges. Not just similarities, but near-identical blueprints. Joseph Campbell called these monomyths, the recurring storylines that pulse through every culture's legends like a shared heartbeat. Take the flood narratives. The Mesopotamian hero Utnapishtim builds an ark after divine whispers, just as Noah does in Genesis. The Kayachmaya Popolva describes a great deluge wiping out a flawed humanity, leaving only a few to repopulate. Even in distant Taiwan, the Bunun people tell of a brother and sister surviving a world-ending flood inside a wooden drum. The details align with eerie precision: divine warnings, vessels of salvation, animals saved in pairs. These parallels stretch far beyond coincidence, pointing to something deeper wired into humanity's storytelling DNA. But why would cultures separated by oceans and millennia dream up such similar disasters? One theory points to our shared psychological wiring. Catastrophes force transformation. They're the ultimate crucible for heroes. Whether it's the Sumerian Gilgamesh grieving his friend Enkidu or the Greek Deucalion rebuilding after Zeus's flood, destruction becomes the catalyst for growth. Psychologists call this the crisis narrative, a mental framework where chaos precedes renewal. It's not just in myths, modern disaster films follow the same arc. From asteroid impacts to zombie plagues, audiences crave stories where collapse clears the path for rebirth. Our brains seem hardwired to view catastrophe not just as an ending, but as the necessary first step toward something new. Yet there's another tantalizing possibility. What if these stories are fractured memories of real global events? Geologists have found evidence of a comet impact around 12,900 years ago that triggered wildfires across continents and plunged the planet into a mini ice age. Indigenous Australian tales describe a time when the sky burned and the earth shook, details matching impact crater records. The same period saw sea levels rise 400 feet as glaciers melted, flooding coastal settlements worldwide. Could flood myths from Babylon to Brazil be distorted recollections of these actual traumas? When the Cherokee speak of a great moon that fell, causing worldwide fires, it's hard not to think of cosmic airbursts. The hero's journey often begins with this rupture, the call to adventure forced by disaster. In Norse mythology, Ragnarok's fires kill the gods but allow two humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, to inherit a cleansed earth. The Hindu prince Manu survives the deluge to become humanity's progenitor. These aren't just exciting plot devices, they're survival manuals disguised as entertainment. By embedding lessons in myth, ancient cultures ensured critical knowledge. How to build boats, store seeds, or endure long winters would outlast generations. The Greek Titanomachy, where Olympians overthrow the old order, mirrors real historical upheavals like the Bronze Age collapse, where societies crumbled and reinvented themselves. What's truly remarkable is how these patterns persist today. Modern dystopian fiction still follows the monomyth's beats: collapse, adaptation, rebirth. From The Road to Mad Max, we're still telling the same essential story. When everything falls apart, something resilient remains. That's the power of comparative mythology. It reveals not just how we explain disasters, but how we survive them by turning chaos into narrative and fear into hope. The next time you hear an ancient flood story, listen closely. It might be less about the water and more about the hands that rebuilt the world after it receded. There's a chilling pattern woven into humanity's oldest stories, the idea that disaster isn't random but deserved. The biblical flood wipes the earth clean because the wickedness of man was great. Sodom and Gomorrah burn for their sins. The Greek Zeus, disgusted by human corruption, unleashes a deluge that only Deucalion and Pyrrha survived. These aren't just tales of destruction, they're moral reckonings where catastrophe becomes the ultimate divine critique. What's fascinating isn't just the consistency of this theme across cultures, it's how it mirrors the way we still process disaster today, threading judgment through tragedy like an unbroken chain. Consider the Hindu concept of pralaya, cyclical destruction where the universe dissolves due to humanity's spiritual decay. Or the Aztec belief that the fourth sun ended in famine because people failed to honor the gods with blood sacrifice. Even in Norse mythology, Ragnarok arrives after oaths are broken and kinship betrayed. These stories share a core assumption: the cosmos has rules, and violating them invites chaos. It's a world view where earthquakes and floods aren't just geological events, they're report cards on collective morality. Modern environmental warnings often echo this ancient logic. When we speak of Mother Nature's revenge or frame climate change as punishment for greed, we're resurrecting the same archetype, only now. The angry deity is an ecosystem pushed past its limits. Yet this moral framing carries a double edge. On one hand, it fosters accountability. The Babylonian-era epic warns that cities fall when leaders grow corrupt, a lesson that inspired real governance reforms. On the other, it can distort understanding. The 1755 Lisbon earthquake sparked fierce debates. Was it divine retribution, as some clergy claimed, or simply tectonic shifts, as Enlightenment thinkers argued? Voltaire satirized the former view in Candide, mocking the idea that disasters target the wicked. Today, similar tensions persist. When hurricanes or pandemics strike, some still ask, what did we do to deserve this? As if suffering were a cosmic balancing act rather than a natural process. The psychological roots of this pattern run deep. Studies show that people instinctively seek meaning in chaos, preferring the idea of a just world where events follow moral rules. This bias explains why flood myths so often feature a lone righteous survivor, Noah, Manu, Utnapishtim, who earns salvation through virtue. It's comforting to believe that goodness shields us, even when reality proves messier. Indigenous Australian stories take a different tack. Their flood narratives often blame human actions disrupting sacred landscapes, framing disaster as ecological consequence rather than divine wrath. This subtle shift refocuses responsibility from cosmic justice to earthly stewardship, a nuance that feels strikingly modern. Perhaps the most provocative question isn't whether ancient people were right to see morality in disaster, but why we still do. When climate activists evoke nature fighting back, they're tapping into the same mythic impulse that shaped the Epic of Gilgamesh. The difference: today's gods are measurable carbon levels, deforestation rates, ocean acidification. The lesson hidden in these old stories isn't about appeasing angry deities, it's recognizing that civilizations thrive when they align with larger systems, whether called divine order or ecological balance. The ruins of Easter Island stand as a silent testament. Societies that ignore their myths' warnings sometimes become myths themselves. There's a reason flood myths don't end with the deluge. They climax with a lone figure stepping onto muddy shores, surveying the wreckage and starting anew. Whether it's Noah releasing the dove, Manu planting the first post-flood seed, or the Incan couple surviving in a sealed box that floats to the peaks of the Andes, these survivor archetypes aren't just plot devices. They're humanity's oldest role models for resilience. What's striking is how often these chosen figures share the same traits. They're not warriors or kings, but caretakers, builders, farmers, and keepers of sacred knowledge. The Babylonian Utnapishtim is warned by the god E to dismantle his house and construct an ark, embedding practical survival skills in divine instruction. The Maori tell of Tohaki, who weaves a kite from flax to escape rising waters, turning everyday materials into lifelines. These stories whisper a truth our modern world often forgets. When catastrophe strikes, brute strength matters less than adaptability and foresight. Look closer at the survival blueprints hidden in these myths. The biblical Noah doesn't just save his family, he preserves biodiversity, gathering animals 2 by 2. The Hindu Manu is instructed to collect medicinal herbs and seeds before the flood, ensuring post-disaster food security. Even the K.H. Maya Popol Vuh specifies that the survivors, a fox and a parrot, carry fire in their tails, an allegory for safeguarding technology. These details feel eerily prescient in an era of seed vaults and digital backups. Our ancestors weren't just spinning tales, they were encoding emergency protocols in narrative form, ensuring critical knowledge would outlast written records. The Cherokee story of the first fire, stolen from the underworld and guarded in a hollow sycamore, parallels modern efforts to preserve energy sources during blackouts. Coincidence or proof that ancient minds understood disaster preparedness on an instinctual level, yet these survivor figures also carry a moral dimension. In the Sumerian version, Ziusudra earns immortality for his piety, not just his pragmatism. The Norse Lif and Lifthrasir survive Ragnarök because they embody innocence, hiding in Yggdrasil's roots while gods and giants slaughter each other. Even the Greek Deucalion, though favored by Zeus, must prove his worth by casting the bones of his mother, stones representing Gaia, to repopulate the earth. Here lies the deeper lesson. Resilience isn't just about skill, it's about character. Modern psychology confirms that communities with strong social bonds fare better after disasters, a truth ancient myths illustrated through allegory long before Fema existed. When the Ainu of Japan recount how a brother and sister repopulated the world after a tsunami by obeying divine taboos, they're not just explaining origins, they're reinforcing the behaviors that sustain societies under stress. So what does this mean for our climate-anxious present? These archetypes offer more than comfort. They provide a framework. Noah's Ark symbolizes the need for collective preservation. Monu's seed collection mirrors today's heirloom crop movements. The Hades story of Raven guiding survivors to new land after an ice age flood resonates with modern climate migration planning. The difference is that our ancestors wrapped these strategies in sacred narrative, ensuring they'd be retold for generations. Perhaps that's the most urgent takeaway. In a world bracing for upheaval, we shouldn't just stockpile supplies. We should craft stories worth remembering. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that the survivors aren't always the strongest or smartest, but those who heed warnings, share knowledge, and keep the fire burning, no matter how high the waters rise. The idea that the world must burn to be reborn isn't just storytelling. It's a psychological lifeline woven into humanity's grandest visions of destiny. Take the Book of Revelation, where cosmic battles and plagues climax not in eternal darkness, but in a new heaven and new earth. Islamic tradition describes Qiyamah's terrifying events, the sun rising from the west, the beast emerging, yet promises an afterlife of justice and peace. Even the Hopi prophecy of the Great Purification foretells a world cleansed by fire, where only those who live in harmony with nature will inherit the renewed earth. These aren't tales of hopelessness, they're narratives of radical transformation, where destruction is never the final word. What's fascinating is how these traditions mirror nature's own cycles. Forest fires spark new growth, volcanoes enrich the soil. The scientific concept of succession shows how ecosystems rebuild after devastation, often becoming more resilient than before. Ancient cultures observed these patterns and projected them onto the cosmos, imagining existence itself as a series of deaths and rebirths. The Hindu concept of pralaya, where the universe dissolves into Brahman only to re-emerge, parallels modern theories of cosmic cycles, from oscillating universe models to the idea of multiverses being born from collapsing black holes. Whether through myth or physics, the message is the same. Endings are rarely absolute, but why does this theme resonate so deeply? Psychologists point to our need for closure and control. Chaos feels less terrifying when framed as a necessary step towards something better. The Norse Ragnarök isn't just about giants slaughtering gods, it's about the survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, inheriting a world where fields unsowed will bear fruit. That's the core of eschatology. It's not about the end, but the promise of what comes after. Even secular apocalypse narratives follow this template. Post-nuclear stories like The Road or climate fiction like Parable of the Sower focus less on the collapse itself than on the communities that rise from its ashes. The darkest eschatologies often contain the brightest hope. Zoroastrianism's Frashokriti envisions a final battle where evil is vanquished and all souls are purified, even those once damned. Christian millennialism speaks of lions lying with lambs, swords beaten into plowshares. These visions reveal a profound truth. Our ancestors didn't just fear the end, they longed for it as a chance to correct the world's imbalances. Modern movements channel this same impulse, from environmentalists working to save the planet to transhumanists dreaming of a post-scarcity future. The language changes, but the archetype remains, the belief that after the storm, the air will be cleaner, the ground more fertile, and humanity, if it survives, wiser. Perhaps that's the real power of these stories. They don't just predict the future, they shape it. When a Hopi elder speaks of migrating ants as a sign to prepare for purification, or a climate scientist warns of tipping points, both are issuing calls to action wrapped in urgency. The difference is that ancient eschatologies often included roadmaps, ethical codes, communal rituals, ways to live so you'd be among the renewed. In a world facing real existential threats, that might be their most enduring lesson. The end is always coming, but so is the beginning. And which one we meet depends on what we do today. Modern nightmares wear different masks than ancient ones, but the bones of the story remain eerily familiar. Where our ancestors feared floods and falling stars, we dread mushroom clouds and melting ice caps. The atomic age birthed its own mythology, Oppenheimer quoting the Bhagavad Gita as he unleashed Shiva's dance of destruction, Cold War bunkers stocked with canned goods like arks for the nuclear winter. Even the language we use echoes the past. Apocalypse comes from the Greek word for revelation, but today it's shorthand for any civilization-ending threat. The parallels run deeper than semantics. Just as Bronze Age cultures passed down flood myths, our pop culture replays doomsday scenarios like ritual warnings. From Dr. Strangelove to The Last of Us, we're still telling the same essential story, only now. The gods wear lab coats and the monsters are microscopic. Consider how pandemic narratives evolved during COVID-19. The same societies that dismissed ancient plagues as divine punishment scrambled to assign blame: bat soup, lab leaks, government incompetence. The moral framing is identical to the Babylonian-era epic, where gods unleashed pestilence as punishment for human noise. Modern zombie lore follows this template too. In World War Z or The Walking Dead, outbreaks often stem from corporate greed or military hubris. These aren't just entertainment, they're secular theodicy, attempts to make senseless suffering feel meaningful by rooting it in human failings. Even climate change discourse mirrors flood myths, scientists replacing prophets as the bearers of uncomfortable truths. Greta Thunberg's "How Dare You" speech channeling the fury of Cassandra, or Noah's ignored warnings. Yet there's a crucial difference. Ancient myths offered resolution, a rainbow covenant, a surviving pair to repopulate the earth. Our digital age apocalypses often lack that catharsis. Films like Don't Look Up end with civilization obliterated by a comet, while climate models project irreversible tipping points. This shift reveals a darker modern anxiety. What if this time there's no rebirth? The Norse had Ragnarok's renewal, but our version of the story might climax with silent servers and radioactive dust. Perhaps that's why prepper culture has exploded, a literal enactment of survivor myths. Stockpiling seeds like Monu, building underground shelters reminiscent of Hopi prophecies, even tech billionaires drafting plans for Martian arks. These aren't just practical measures, they're myth-making in real time. When Elon Musk tweets about making humanity a multiplanetary species, he's riffing on the same archetype as the Maori hero Tohaki, climbing to heaven to secure humanity's future. The medium changes, but the message endures. Disaster is coming, and the wise prepare. The most telling parallel lies in conspiracy theories, which function like modern creation myths. QAnon's Great Awakening mirrors Zoroastrian eschatology, a final battle where hidden truths are revealed and evil purged. Flat earthers don't just reject science, they resurrect pre-Copernican cosmologies where the Earth was special, protected, meaningful. These movements thrive because they offer what all apocalyptic narratives do: a script for chaos, a promise that someone's in control, even if it's a cabal of elites or an algorithm. So are we replaying ancient narratives? Absolutely, but with a twist. Where myths once used gods to explain volcanoes, we use data models. Where shamans divined the future in animal entrails, we pass climate graphs. The human mind still craves patterns in the chaos, still whispers, "This happened before." The real question isn't whether we're creating new myths, but whether we'll learn from the old ones. That survival depends not on predicting the end correctly, but on heeding the warnings woven into stories that outlasted empires. After all, every civilization before us thought they'd be the exception. The ruins suggest otherwise. Science is now pulling back the veil on ancient myths, revealing startling truths hidden beneath layers of allegory. Take the Storegga slide, a colossal underwater landslide off Norway's coast around 8,200 years ago. When the seafloor gave way, it triggered a tsunami so powerful it left sediment deposits as far away as Scotland and Greenland. Now listen to the Gaelic legend of the kingdom of Cantra Gaelod, said to have drowned when a well overflowed after its guardian neglected her duties. Coastal surveys show submerged forests and human footprints preserved in ancient peat beds along Wales shores, dating to the exact period of the Storegga disaster. What once seemed like poetic fancy now reads as an encrypted eyewitness account, a generation's trauma preserved in metaphor. Volcanic eruptions leave even clearer fingerprints in the mythic record. When Indonesia's Toba supervolcano erupted 74,000 years ago, it spewed enough ash to lower global temperatures for a decade, possibly triggering a genetic bottleneck in human evolution. Half a world away, the Klamath people of North America tell of a battle between sky god Skell and underworld deity Lau that ended with Mount Mazoma's destruction, a story that aligns with the volcanic formation of Oregon's crater lake 7,700 years ago. The parallels are too precise to dismiss. Indigenous Australians describe a time when the sky turned black and water sources vanished, matching geological evidence of Toba's ash layer in their ancient campsites. These aren't just stories, they're survival records, warning descendants of landscapes that can turn lethal in an instant. Then there's the Carrington event of 1859, when a solar storm set telegraph wires ablaze and painted the skies crimson as far as Cuba. Imagine that same electromagnetic pulse striking during the Bronze Age, when people interpreted celestial phenomena as divine messages. The Babylonian dynastic prophecy speaks of flaming lights in the sky preceding the fall of kingdoms, while Chinese annals record phantom stars that brought chaos to earthly rulers. Modern astronomers confirm such extreme solar events recur every few centuries, meaning our ancestors likely witnessed multiple Carringtons, weaving their terror into myth. The Hindu deity Indra's Vajra, described as a thunderbolt that lit the three worlds, takes on new meaning when you learn about plasma discharges during solar superstorms. What emerges from this interdisciplinary detective work is a radical idea. Mythology might be Earth's oldest scientific database. When Hopi elders speak of blue star catchinas heralding purification, astronomers note that nearby supernova could bathe our planet in radiation. The Aboriginal story of the fire devil Wallenbar matches impact crater evidence in Australia's Northern Territory. Even Plato's account of Atlantis sinking in a single day and night gains credence when you study the rapid flooding of Doggerland after Storegga's tsunami. The key lies in reading these stories not as fiction, but as coded observations, ancient PowerPoint presentations where each slide is a legend, each bullet point a survival tip. The real breakthrough comes when we stop asking, "Did this happen?" and start asking, "What did they see?" Geologists studying Mediterranean tsunami deposits find layers of marine sediment in Bronze Age ruins, explaining why so many cultures describe angry gods shaking the sea. Dendrochronologists tracing tree rings uncover global cooling events that align with famine myths from Egypt to China. By treating myths as hypotheses rather than fairy tales, scientists are piecing together a lost history of planetary upheaval, one where our ancestors weren't just storytellers, but the first disaster researchers, painstakingly recording data in the only format that could endure millennia: narrative. This fusion of science and folklore doesn't diminish ancient wisdom, it elevates it. When a Maori Tohunga priest recites how the hero Tohaki climbed to heaven to restore the sun after a long winter, he's preserving knowledge of volcanic winters that climatologists now study in ice cores. The Greek myth of Phaethon's disastrous solar chariot ride mirrors the atmospheric effects of a comet airburst. These stories were never meant to be taken literally, but neither were they mere entertainment. They were survival manuals written in the ink of imagination, ensuring that when the next catastrophe came, whether flood, fire, or solar storm, someone would remember what to do. As satellites map forgotten fault lines and particle accelerators simulate supervolcanic eruptions, we're finally learning to decipher humanity's oldest warnings. The gap between legend and history narrows with every sediment core pulled from the ocean floor, every isotope analysis of ancient tree rings. Perhaps the most humbling realization is this: our ancestors weren't primitive fantasists. They were meticulous observers who encoded their hard-won knowledge in stories vivid enough to outlast empires. In an age of climate crisis and cosmic uncertainty, their myths might just be the most valuable textbooks we have. The sheer number of flood myths scattered across every inhabited continent isn't just a curiosity, it's a puzzle begging to be solved. From the biblical Noah to the Sumerian Ziusudra, from the Inca Nunu Pachacuti to the Aboriginal Gunabibai, these stories share a spine-chilling consistency. Water rising without mercy, wiping the slate clean, leaving only a handful of survivors to rebuild. But here's where it gets fascinating. Modern geology confirms that our planet has endured catastrophic flooding events dramatic enough to inspire such legends. Take the Black Sea deluge hypothesis, where around 7,600 years ago, melting glaciers caused the Mediterranean to burst through the Bosporus, flooding an area the size of Ireland in months. Satellite images reveal ancient shorelines beneath the Black Sea's waters, and sediment cores contain freshwater mollusks abruptly replaced by saltwater species. Hard evidence of a sudden inundation. For the farming communities along those shores, this wouldn't have been a gradual rise but a wall of water rewriting their world overnight. Now zoom out to the Pacific, where oral traditions from Hawaii to New Zealand describe eras when the ocean swallowed islands whole. The Cumulipo, a Hawaiian creation chant, speaks of a time when the sea covered the earth and receded, leaving only the mountain peaks exposed. Meanwhile, archaeologists have found submerged settlements off Australia's northern coast, their stone tools and fire hearths now lying under 30 feet of water. Proof that coastal peoples witnessed rising seas as Ice Age glaciers melted. These aren't isolated incidents. Between 14,000 and 6,000 years ago, global sea levels rose nearly 400 feet, drowning countless settlements and transforming entire landscapes. Imagine the stories survivors would tell, not just of floods, but of entire continents disappearing beneath the waves. Yet the flood myth tapestry is woven with more than just rising tides. Mega tsunamis leave their own marks, In the Pacific Northwest, indigenous legends like the Quilute's tale of Thunderbird and Whale describe a colossal wave triggered by a battle between spirits. Geologists have since uncovered evidence of a massive tsunami around 1700 CE, with sand deposits and drowned forests matching the oral histories. Similar finds in the Mediterranean suggest the Thera eruption's tsunami reached heights of 150 feet, devastating Minoan coastal towns and possibly inspiring Plato's Atlantis narrative. These weren't just local tragedies, they were generation-defining catastrophes, the kind of events that reshape religions and birth new cosmologies. But why do these stories share such specific details: arcs, animal pairs, rainbow covenants? One theory points to the psychological need for structure amid chaos. When disaster strikes, the mind seeks patterns, a reason, a warning, a lesson. The Babylonian Atrahasis epic frames the flood as divine punishment for human noise, while the Maori story of Tohaki positions it as a test of ingenuity. The recurring motif of a righteous survivor, whether Noah, Manu, or Deucalion, serves a dual purpose, explaining why some lived while others perished, and modeling the virtues needed to endure future calamities. It's no accident that these narratives often include instructions for rebuilding, from preserving seeds to navigating by stars. They're survival guides disguised as sacred lore. The most compelling evidence linking flood myths to real events comes from their distribution. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia shouldn't share such strikingly similar stories unless they're drawing from a common experience. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that 12,800 years ago, comet fragments struck Earth, triggering wildfires, abrupt cooling, and possibly even mega floods from collapsing ice dams. Ice cores from Greenland show a platinum spike matching extraterrestrial impacts, while ancient Mesopotamian texts describe the gods raining pitch and fire. Even the Aboriginal story of the fire devil Wallenba, who brought flames from the sky, aligns with impact craters in Australia's Northern Territory. Whether through tsunamis, glacial outbursts, or cosmic collisions, our ancestors seem to have witnessed waters rising with terrifying force and passed down the warning in the only language that could span generations: myth. So is the Great Flood fact or fiction? The answer might be both. No single deluge explains every story, but countless real disasters could have seeded them. Like shards of a shattered mirror, each culture reflected the trauma through its own lens, some seeing divine judgment, others cosmic cycles, still others tests of resilience. What unites them isn't a shared event, but a shared human response to catastrophe, the urge to transform terror into meaning, chaos into narrative. The next time you hear an ancient flood story, listen past the water. You might just catch the echo of a real wave crashing on a real shore, and the voices of those who survived to whisper, remember, volcanic eruptions don't just reshape landscapes, they rewrite mythologies. When Thera exploded around 1600 BCE, the blast was so colossal it may have birthed one of history's most enduring legends, Atlantis. Plato's description of a sophisticated island kingdom sinking beneath the waves in a single day and night mirrors the fate of Akrotiri, a Minoan city on Thera buried under volcanic ash. Frescoes of spirals and bull leaping, eerily similar to Plato's account of Atlantean culture, were preserved in the ruins like snapshots of a frozen moment. But Thera's influence didn't stop there. Egyptian texts from the same era describe 9 days of darkness, possibly from ash clouds blotting out the sun, while Chinese records note unseasonal frosts and failed harvests, global disruptions woven into folklore as cosmic imbalances or angry deities. Half a world away, the eruption of Krakatoa in 535 CE left its own indelible mark. Javanese chronicles speak of the mountain of Kapi splitting apart with a roar heard across kingdoms, followed by waves that swallowed coastal villages whole. The Pustaka Raja Palwa, an ancient Javanese text, describes the event in terms that could be lifted from a disaster film. The world shook, the sky rained ash, and the sea rose to drown the land. Yet embedded in this chaos are survival lessons. The legend of Sanghyong Sri, a Javanese rice goddess who saves humanity by teaching them to rebuild on higher ground, mirrors modern strategies for tsunami-resistant architecture. These stories weren't just catharsis, they were oral guidebooks for future generations. Then there's Vesuvius, whose eruption in 79 CE didn't just preserve Pompeii, it etched itself into Roman consciousness as divine retribution. The poet Statius called it the god's wrath made stone, while local cults reinterpreted Vulcan, god of fire, as a capricious force demanding appeasement. But the most haunting echoes come from the indigenous Samnites, who'd warned for centuries that the mountain was a sleeping giant. Their myths described Vulcan as a blacksmith whose forge lay beneath Vesuvius, his hammer strikes causing earthquakes. Modern volcanology confirms their intuition. The same magma chambers that fueled the 79 CE eruption still simmer today, a reminder that some threats never truly sleep. The pattern repeats globally. In Iceland, the 930 CE Eldgjá eruption, the largest lava flow in recorded history, inspired the apocalyptic Völuspá poem, where Surtur's flames engulf the earth. Native American tribes near Wyoming's Yellowstone tell of a burning underworld that occasionally breathes fire, matching the supervolcano's eruption cycles. Even the Aztec sun god Tonatiuh demands blood sacrifices to keep the world from plunging into eternal darkness, a metaphor perhaps for the volcanic winters that followed eruptions like Ilopango in 539 CE, which dropped global temperatures for years. What unites these stories isn't just their fiery spectacle, but their psychological function. Volcanoes embody nature's duality, creators of fertile soil and agents of annihilation. The Hawaiian goddess Pele exemplifies this tension. Her lava flows destroy villages but also form new land. Maori legends of Uamoko, the unborn god of earthquakes, frame volcanic activity as the stirrings of a restless fetus within Earth's womb. These myths don't just explain disasters, they make them meaningful, transforming arbitrary violence into narratives where humans can exert some control, whether through rituals, prophecies, or pragmatic adaptations. The real question isn't which myths were inspired by volcanoes, but how many we've yet to decode. When the Khmer Empire's chronicles mention the sky vomiting stones before anchors decline, could they describe an eruption from Indonesia's Rinjani? Does the Welsh tale of the red dragon battling the white dragon reflect ancient memories of toxic gas plumes from European eruptions? Every culture living in volcanically active zones seems to have encoded warnings in their lore, waiting for us to listen. After all, the next time the earth tears open, it won't just be lava and ash that emerge, it'll be the ghosts of stories told millennia ago, whispering, "We tried to warn you." Earthquakes don't just split the ground, they crack open the human imagination. Across continents and eras, cultures have conjured vivid explanations for the Earth's violent tremors, painting disasters as the work of subterranean beasts or divine retribution. The Greeks envisioned Typhon, a fire-breathing giant buried beneath Mount Etna, whose thrashing limbs shook the world. In Japan, the colossal catfish Namezu writhed under the islands, restrained by the god Kashima, except when his vigilance slipped, unleashing devastation. These weren't mere fairy tales, they were attempts to rationalize the unfathomable, to assign agency where none could be seen. Without plate tectonics, our ancestors personified seismic rage, transforming blind geological forces into characters with motives and moods. The consequences of these myths ran deep. Take the aftermath of the 1755 Lisbon earthquake, which flattened churches along with brothels, killing thousands on All Saints' Day. Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire seized on the disaster to challenge the idea of divine punishment, asking why a benevolent God would target pious worshippers. Meanwhile, Jesuit preachers declared the quake a rebuke for sin, fundraising for golden chalices as survivors starved. This collision of myth and modernity marked a turning point, the moment Western Europe began divorcing disaster from morality, laying groundwork for modern seismology. Yet elsewhere, older interpretations persisted. In the Andes, the Inca had long worshipped Pachamama, the Earth Mother whose quakes demanded offerings of chicha and coca. Even today, some Andean communities bury llama fetuses to calm the ground, blending ancient cosmology with contemporary science. What's striking is how these personifications shaped disaster response. Cultures that saw quakes as capricious acts like the Norse, who blamed Loki's chains rattling in his cave, often focused on appeasement rather than prevention. Contrast this with Japan's Namezu legends, which carried a subtle lesson: vigilance matters. Kashima's restraining stone symbolized the need for constant preparedness, a cultural ethos that still informs Japan's earthquake drills and engineering. The Aztec god Tepealotl, whose jaguar roars caused tremors, reinforced the idea that quakes were natural, not moral, events, an attitude that may have aided their architectural innovations, like flexible pyramids designed to sway. Beneath these myths lies a profound psychological truth. Humans fear chaos less when it wears a face. The Siberian Tartars spoke of a giant sled dog scratching fleas, shaking the earth with its paws. The Maya told of the Bacabs, four brothers holding up the sky, whose staggered movements caused temblors. These narratives didn't just explain, they comforted. If earthquakes came from creatures or gods, they could potentially be bargained with. Modern hazard maps and Richter scales offer a different kind of reassurance, but the impulse remains the same: to tame terror with understanding. Perhaps the most revealing quake myth comes from New Zealand, where the Maori described the god Uamoko, unborn child of earth and sky, still turning in his mother's womb. His restless kicks cause volcanoes and tremors, but also bring fertile soil. Here, destruction and creation are entwined, not punishment but birth pangs. It's a perspective that resonates in today's seismic science, where we know the same subduction zones that threaten megathrust quakes also build mountain ranges and mineral deposits. Our ancestors may have lacked textbooks, but their stories grasped an essential truth: the earth isn't angry, it's just alive. 4,200 years ago, something snapped. From the Nile to the Indus, rivers shrank to trickles, harvests withered, and cities emptied as a megad. Drought, now called the 4.2 kiloyear event, gripped the planet. In Mesopotamia, the Akkadian Empire, humanity's first great multicultural civilization, crumbled as famine tore through its heart. Clay tablets from the ruins speak of dust choking the skies and mothers bartering children for grain. Meanwhile, along the Yellow River, Chinese legends describe 10 suns scorching the earth until the hero Howie shot down 9 with his bow, a poetic echo of prolonged drought preserved in mythological code. Even Egypt's old kingdom faltered as the Nile's floods failed, giving rise to the Ipuwer Papyrus's lament. The desert claims the farmland, blood is everywhere. These weren't isolated tragedies, they were dominoes falling across the ancient world, all toppled by a single, invisible force: climate change. What makes this event so chilling is how precisely it mirrors modern crises. The 1930s Dust Bowl turned America's breadbasket into a swirling wasteland. forcing mass migrations immortalized in Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. Decades later, the Sahel droughts of the 1970s and 80s displaced millions in Africa, proving that even in our technological age, societies remain at the mercy of shifting rains. Ancient cultures lacked satellites and climate models, but they encoded these patterns in stories meant to outlast empires. The Babylonian Poem of Error warns of gods unleashing 7 years of famine when humanity disrespects the land. Australian Aboriginal songlines describe ancestral beings who altered the landscape during droughts, teaching survival routes to waterholes still used today. These narratives weren't just folklore, they were oral infrastructure, preserving ecological knowledge across generations. The real question isn't whether ancient people understood climate change, but why we've stopped listening to their warnings. When the Maya depicted Chak, the rain god, withholding storms to punish deforestation, they were observing the link between environmental abuse and drought. Norse myths of Fimbulwinter, 3 years of endless snow preceding Ragnarök, mirror the volcanic winters that followed eruptions like Tambora in 1815, which caused the year without a summer. Our ancestors didn't need IPCC reports to recognize nature's feedback loops. They saw them etched in abandoned cities and mass graves. The ruins of Cambodia's Angkor Wat bear scars of water management failures during the medieval warm period, while the ancestral Pueblones left cliff dwellings in the American Southwest when megadroughts made agriculture impossible. Their descendants, the Hopi, still recount stories of migrations triggered by dwindling springs, reinforcing the memory through ritual dance. Today, as wildfires rage and glaciers retreat, we're repeating an old pattern, interpreting disaster through the lens of myth. Climate activists frame Earth as Gaia seeking vengeance, while dystopian fiction imagines water wars straight from the Mad Max playbook. The difference is that ancient myths ultimately offered hope blueprints for adaptation. The Mesopotamian epic of Atrahasis concludes with gods and humans renegotiating their relationship, instituting crop rotation and limits on reproduction to prevent ecological overload. In West Africa, the Dogon people's creation story emphasizes balance, portraying Earth as a granary that mustn't be overharvested. These weren't naive fantasies, they were survival strategies dressed as allegory. So what would our ancestors say about 21st century climate denial? Perhaps they'd point to the irony. Societies that recorded droughts in stone and song now ignore data from ice cores and satellites. The 4.2 kiloyear event didn't just collapse empires, it birthed cautionary tales that outlasted them. As we face our own unfolding crisis, the real test isn't whether we can invent new technologies, but whether we'll finally heed the oldest lesson carved into humanity's collective memory. Civilizations that forget their vulnerability to the skies don't get second chances. The myths have been whispering it for millennia. This time, the ending is ours to write. Celestial events have always held humanity in their thrall, not as distant lights, but as urgent messages carved across the night. When Halley's comet blazed over England in 1066, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded it as a portent so dire, men were stricken with fear. Weeks later, William the Conqueror landed at Hastings, weaving the comet into his victory narrative as divine approval. Half a millennium earlier, Julius Caesar's assassination was followed by a comet so bright, Romans believed it carried his soul to the gods, a story later used to legitimize his heir Augustus. These weren't isolated moments, they reveal a pattern etched deep in human consciousness. The sky doesn't just watch, it speaks. Eclipses provoked even sharper dread. The ancient Chinese saw the sun being devoured by a celestial dragon, beating drums to scare the beast away. Norse myths described wolves chasing the sun and moon, their occasional catches plunging the world into darkness. But perhaps the most chilling record comes from the Assyrian city of Nineveh, where a clay tablet notes an eclipse in 763 BC, linking it to an uprising that toppled the king. Modern astronomers have confirmed the timing, proving this wasn't superstition, it was cause and effect, as perceived by a culture that saw no separation between heaven and earth. Supernova left their own scars. In 1054, a star in Taurus exploded so brightly, Chinese astronomers noted it was visible for 23 days, even at noon. The Anasazi of Choco Canyon may have recorded the same event in petroglyphs, a handprint beside a crescent moon and a six-pointed star. But the most haunting response comes from the Aboriginal Gamilaroi people, whose oral traditions describe a great fire in the sky that brought drought and conflict. Recent studies suggest this could be the supernova that created the Coalsack Nebula, its effects preserved in story for millennia. What's striking isn't just the consistency of these interpretations, it's their practicality. Before telescopes, celestial events were the only warning system for disasters. The link between comets and drought wasn't just myth. Ice cores showed dust veils from comet debris can trigger years of failed harvests. When the Maya tracked Venus's cycles to predict war, they may have been observing how its appearances coincided with dry seasons, prime time for raids. Even the Bible's Star of Bethlehem has been retroactively linked to a rare Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that guided astrologers to planetary omens. Yet the true power of these myths lies in their duality. Yes, comets signal doom, but also opportunity. The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma supposedly read a comet as both a warning of Spanish invasion and a chance to repent. The Norse saw eclipses as the wolves' gaining ground, but also as reminders to strengthen alliances before Ragnarok. These stories didn't just spread fear, they structured response, turning helplessness into ritual, chaos into order. Today, we understand the mechanics comets as icy leftovers, eclipses as orbital shadows, but the awe remains. When solar storms paint the aurora borealis red, or meteors streak like fleeting prophecies, we're reminded that the sky still holds mysteries. The difference is that now we measure where our ancestors trembled. Yet in that shift, something vital was lost. The humility that comes from believing the universe is watching, and that its signs, whether gods or gamma rays, demand our attention. The idea of a lost golden age lingers in humanity's oldest stories like a half-remembered dream. The Garden of Eden, where humans walked with gods and hunger, was unknown. The Hindu Satya Yuga, a time when people lived for thousands of years in perfect harmony. The Greek poet Hesiod's golden age, when men lived like gods, free from toil and grief. These aren't just wistful fantasies, they're cultural memories dressed in myth, each carrying the same haunting question: what if we had it all and lost it? Archaeology offers tantalizing clues. Around 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age retreated, some hunter-gatherer societies experienced what anthropologists call the original affluent society. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey suggest communities with surplus resources, complex rituals, and no signs of warfare, at least for a time. The Natufian culture of the Levant left behind evidence of early sedentism, with stone houses and granaries predating agriculture by millennia. Could these pockets of stability be the seeds of Golden Age myths? When the Hebrew Bible describes Eden's rivers flowing with gold and onyx, it might be echoing faint recollections of a Neolithic world where nature's abundance seemed limitless. But here's the twist: these myths almost always end in catastrophe. The golden race of Hesiod's tales vanishes when Prometheus steals fire, inviting Zeus's wrath. The Hindu Satya Yuga degenerates into the Kali Yuga, an age of strife and shortened lifespans. Even Atlantis, Plato's paradisiacal island, falls due to its people's arrogance. This narrative arc, paradise, corruption, punishment, reveals something profound about human psychology. Nostalgia isn't just comfort, it's a mirror. By imagining a purer past, we articulate what we've lost and why. The Aboriginal concept of dream time, where ancestral beings shaped the land in a sacred era, serves as both origin story and moral compass, reminding people that the land's fertility depends on ritual upkeep. The scientific record complicates the picture. The transition from foraging to farming, often romanticized as progress, coincided with shorter stature, worse nutrition, and infectious diseases. Skeletons from early agricultural societies show signs of repetitive labor and vitamin deficiencies rare among their hunter-gatherer predecessors. This Neolithic decline eerily parallels myths of a fall from grace, like the biblical expulsion from Eden, where Adam is cursed to toil in the soil. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh laments the hero's loss of wild vitality when he leaves the forest for the city. These stories might encode generational trauma from humanity's most disruptive revolution, the birth of civilization itself. Yet Golden Age myths aren't just about the past, they're about the future. The Norse envisioned a reborn world after Ragnarok, greener and fairer than before. The Hopi speak of a coming fifth world, purified by crisis. Even secular utopias, from Marx's classless society to Silicon Valley's techno-optimism, inherit this ancient template. The real power of these stories lies in their duality. They're both cautionary tales and blueprints. When the Babylonian-era epic warns that cities fall when leaders grow corrupt, or the Mayan Popol Vuh describes earlier races of humans destroyed for their flaws, they're not just mourning what's gone, they're offering a map to reclaim it. So were Golden Ages real, perhaps not as literal paradises, but as moments of balance, ecological, social, spiritual, that later generations mythologized. The ruins of Çatalhöyük, with its egalitarian layout and art-filled homes, hint at societies that thrived without kings or walls. The peaceful Indus Valley civilization left no evidence of warfare for nearly a millennium. These flashes of stability, however fleeting, became the stuff of legend, and in that transformation lies their enduring gift, not just to lament what was lost, but to imagine what could be rebuilt. After all, every Golden Age myth ends with a whisper, not just remember, but try again. Cataclysms don't just rewrite landscapes, they etch themselves into the soul of a people, becoming the bedrock of who they are. Consider the Jewish Exodus, where the trauma of slavery and the triumph of crossing the Red Sea fused into a collective identity that has endured for millennia. This isn't just history, it's a story retold at Passover tables for generations, transforming catastrophe into a covenant. The parting of the sea isn't merely a miracle, it's a metaphor for resilience, a reminder that liberation often follows crisis. Similarly, the Irish Leber Gabála Érenn, or Book of Invasions, weaves a tapestry of successive waves of settlers, each arriving after cataclysms like floods or battles. These aren't just myths, they're narrative glue, binding communities together with shared origins forged in upheaval. The Maori creation story offers another striking example. Their cosmology begins with Rangi and Papa, the Sky Father and Earth Mother, locked in a suffocating embrace until their children forcibly separate them, unleashing light and chaos into the world. This primal act of violence isn't just a creation myth, it's a cultural blueprint for navigating disruption. The Maori phrase Wakapapa, meaning genealogy, literally means to layer, reflecting how each generation builds upon the fractures of the past. When the Polynesian ancestors of the Maori sailed across the Pacific, surviving storms and starvation, those trials became part of their oral maps, encoded in chants that guided future voyagers. Cataclysms weren't just endured, they were institutionalized as lessons. What's fascinating is how these stories function as psychological armor. After the volcanic destruction of Thera, Minoan refugees may have carried tales of their drowned homeland to Crete, where echoes of Atlantis lingered in Plato's dialogues centuries later. The Norse, living in the shadow of glaciers and geysers, framed their existential struggles through Ragnarok, a doom they could face with courage rather than despair. Even the great flood narratives from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica serve as moral reckonings, reinforcing values like preparedness and humility. These aren't passive memories, they're active tools wielded to strengthen communal bonds in the face of new trials. Modern parallels abound. The Irish potato famine of the 19th century wasn't just a demographic catastrophe. It became a cornerstone of Irish nationalism, fueling diasporic identity from Boston to Sydney. Hiroshima's trauma shaped Japan's post-war pacifism, while the Black Death scars birthed Renaissance innovations in medicine and art. Cataclysms forced societies to ask, who are we now? The answers, whether framed as divine tests, historical turning points, or calls to innovation, reveal the alchemy of cultural survival. So why does this matter today? Because in an era of climate crises and global upheaval, these ancient blueprints offer more than comfort. They provide strategy. When the Maori speak of Kaishiakatanga, guardianship of the land, they're drawing on centuries of adapting to environmental shifts. Jewish traditions of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, turn historical trauma into collective action. These narratives don't just memorialize survival, they institutionalize it, transforming vulnerability into a source of strength. The next time you hear an origin story that begins with disaster, listen closely. It might just hold the key to resilience, not just for the past, but for the uncertain future we all now face. Reconstructing the past through ancient myths is like assembling a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half have faded over time. Take the legendary city of Troy. For centuries, scholars dismissed Homer's Iliad as pure fiction until Heinrich Schliemann uncovered its charred walls in modern-day Turkey. Yet even with physical evidence, questions linger. Was the Trojan War truly fought over Helen, or was she a poetic device to explain Bronze Age power struggles? The ruins confirm a city was destroyed around 1200 BCE, but the epic's embellishments, gods meddling in battle, Achilles' invincibility, reveal how history morphs into myth when filtered through generations of storytellers. This blurring of lines isn't unique to Troy. King Arthur's legend blends post-Roman Britain's chaos with medieval chivalry, making it impossible to untangle the historical warlord from the Round Table's fantasy. Archaeological digs at Tintagel Castle have uncovered 6th century luxury goods suggesting a powerful ruler lived there, but was his name Arthur? The Welsh annals mention a battle at Badon where someone carried the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ on his shoulders, but no explicit link to Excalibur or Merlin. These gaps force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Myths aren't lies, but truths refracted through culture's prism. The challenge deepens with myths lacking physical evidence. The Sumerian king list claims rulers before the flood lived for tens of thousands of years, a clear allegory. Yet the cities it names, like Kish and Uruk, are real. Similarly, the Aboriginal rainbow serpent creation story seems purely symbolic until geologists note its paths align with ancient watercourses vital for survival in arid Australia. These overlaps suggest myths operate on multiple levels, as oral maps, moral parables, and fragmented history all at once. Modern tools are revolutionizing this detective work. LiDAR scans have revealed lost Amazonian cities matching indigenous tales of white stone roads and towers touching the clouds. Isotope analysis of bones from Neolithic mass graves in Germany corroborates legends of violent upheavals during Europe's transition to farming. Even DNA studies now trace Polynesian migration routes that align with oral genealogies passed down for 80 generations. Yet for every breakthrough, there's a dead end. Plato's detailed account of Atlantis still lacks a smoking gun, despite theories linking it to Thera's eruption or Doggerland's sinking. Perhaps the real lesson lies not in separating fact from fiction, but in understanding why certain stories endure. The flood myth recurs globally not because every culture experienced the same deluge, but because water is the great universal leveler, both life-giver and destroyer. The hero's journey template found from Gilgamesh to Star Wars resonates because struggle and transformation define the human condition. When we scrutinize these tales, we're not just hunting for historical kernels, we're decoding how civilizations process trauma, encode survival wisdom, and assert their place in the cosmos. The next time you hear an ancient myth, listen for the layers. Beneath the dragons and deities might lie a drought that starved thousands, a battle that toppled a kingdom, or a comet that scorched the sky. The truth isn't buried in the dirt or the stars, it's woven into both, waiting for us to read between the lines. From floods that swallowed civilizations to fires that scoured the earth clean, these cataclysmic myths aren't just relics of the past. They're mirrors reflecting humanity's eternal dance with chaos. Every culture, from the Inuit to the Inca, has spun tales of world-ending disasters, not merely to frighten or entertain, but to wrestle meaning from the unimaginable. Think of them as ancient guidebooks, their pages filled not with maps or instructions, but with symbols and allegories that whisper, "This happened before." Here's how we survived. The Babylonian flood myth isn't just about water, it's about resilience. Ragnarok isn't just doom, it's rebirth. These stories are layered like archaeological strata, each generation adding its own interpretation to the trauma etched beneath. What's striking is how these legends oscillate between literal and symbolic truth. The sinking of Atlantis might echo the volcanic collapse of Thera, but it also serves as a cautionary tale about hubris. The Hindu pralaya, a cyclical dissolution of the universe, mirrors modern cosmology's heat death of the cosmos, one framed in theology, the other in thermodynamics. Even the Aboriginal Dreamtime, with its serpentine rivers and ancestral fires, encodes real ecological knowledge about water sources and fire management. These myths are neither pure history nor pure fiction, but something far richer, collective memory distilled into narrative, blending observed events with moral imperatives. Consider the urgency humming beneath these tales. They're not passive recounts, they're urgent dispatches from the edge of survival. When the Maya inscribed their prophecies of world endings, they weren't predicting oblivion, they were underscoring the precariousness of order. The Norse didn't just accept Ragnarok, they prepared for it, forging bonds and bravery to face the inevitable. There's a reason these stories endure while empires crumble. They don't just describe catastrophe, they teach us how to meet it. Now fast forward to our era of climate crises and pandemics. We're no less mythmakers than our ancestors, we've just swapped gods for graphs. When we speak of tipping points or climate apocalypse, we're invoking the same archetypes, the same visceral need to frame chaos in terms we can grasp. The difference, our myths are unfolding in real time, broadcast on screens instead of carved in stone. Future generations might mythologize the great burning of 2023's wildfires, or the great silence of COVID-19 lockdowns, turning our struggles into allegories we can't yet foresee. So what's the takeaway? These ancient stories remind us that catastrophe isn't the end, it's a crucible. They challenge us to ask, what wisdom are we encoding for the future? What warnings will we leave in the language of our time? Because if history teaches anything, it's that civilizations don't fall when disasters strike. They fall when they forget how to tell the stories that help them rise. The next chapter of this epic isn't written yet, and that perhaps is the most powerful myth of all. Now it's your turn. What modern events do you think will echo in the myths of the future? Drop your thoughts below. We're all part of this unfolding story. And if you've enjoyed this dive into humanity's oldest warnings, hit subscribe. The past isn't done speaking, and we've got plenty more mysteries to uncover.